May 19th, 1944. 01:35 hours, approximately 140 nautical miles north of Cape Alexander, Solomon Islands. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood on the bridge of USS England, watching his sonar operator's face in the dim red light of the Combat Information Center. The young petty officer's expression had changed. His hand moved to adjust the gain on his headset. Then he looked up. Contact. Range 4,000 yards. Bearing 095. Moving slow. Pendleton felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained calm. Classification? The sonar operator listened for another moment, analyzing the acoustic signature bouncing back through the dark water. Submarine, sir? No doubt about it. What Lieutenant Commander Pendleton did not know was that his ship, a humble destroyer escort displacing just 1,400 tons, was about to begin the most devastating anti-submarine campaign in naval history. In the next 12 days, USS England would sink 6 Imperial Japanese Navy submarines. No other warship in any navy, in any war, before or since, has matched this achievement. Not the famed British submarine hunters of the Atlantic, not the sophisticated anti-submarine warfare platforms of the Cold War, not even the advanced destroyers of modern navies. The Japanese submarine they had detected was I-16, a 1,500-ton fleet submarine carrying a crew of 94 men and a cargo of rice desperately needed by Japanese forces isolated on Bougainville. That submarine would be on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean within 6 hours. But what truly terrified Japanese submarine commanders in the spring and summer of 1944 was not any single weapon or any single ship. It was the realization that American anti-submarine warfare had evolved into a system so sophisticated, so relentless, and so effective that Japanese submarines had become prey rather than predators. This is the story of how one small warship and one extraordinary crew perfected the art of submarine hunting. How American codebreakers provided the intelligence that turned the Pacific into a killing ground for Japanese submarines. How a weapon called the Hedgehog revolutionized anti-submarine warfare, and how the Japanese Navy, despite building some of the most advanced submarines in the world, watched helplessly as American hunter-killer groups systematically destroyed their undersea fleet. The nightmare for Japanese submariners had been building since early 1944, but few understood how completely the mathematics of submarine warfare had shifted against them. By May 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost the ability to operate submarines effectively in the Pacific. American code-breaking meant their movements were known before they departed port. American radar meant they could not surface safely at night. American sonar meant they could not hide in the deep. And American anti-submarine weapons meant that once detected, their chances of survival approached zero. Captain Takeo Miki, commanding officer of submarine RO 106, wrote in his final report before departing Truk on May 10, 1944, a report later recovered from Japanese naval archives after the war. American anti-submarine capabilities have increased dramatically. Our submarines are being hunted with a coordination and efficiency we cannot match. Radio intercepts suggest the Americans know our patrol positions before we arrive. Surface vessels appear at our designated stations as if waiting for us. Night surface operations, once our primary advantage, have become impossibly dangerous due to American radar. Diving deep no longer provides safety, as American depth charges and new weapons reach depths we previously considered safe. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Captain Miki's assessment was entirely correct, though incomplete. He did not know about Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, the American code-breaking operation that had been reading Japanese naval communications since mid-1942. He did not know that every submarine deployment order, every patrol assignment, every resupply mission was being intercepted, decoded, and analyzed by American intelligence officers before Japanese submarines even left port. He did not know that American hunter-killer groups were being positioned along Japanese submarine patrol routes days in advance, turning what Japanese commanders believed were secure operational areas into carefully prepared ambush zones. Most critically, he did not know about the weapon that would kill him. The Hedgehog, a British invention adopted and refined by the United States Navy, was an ahead-throwing anti-submarine mortar that fired 24 projectiles in an elliptical pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike conventional depth, charges that detonated at preset depths and warned submarines of the attack, Hedgehogs only exploded on contact with a submarine's hull. This meant that if a Hedgehog attack failed, the submarine remained unaware it had been attacked and did not know to take evasive action. But if the attack succeeded, the submarine was doomed. The 35-pound warheads contained enough explosive to rupture pressure hulls, flood compartments, and send submarines plummeting to depths from which they could never return. USS England was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, one of 154 such vessels built to counter the submarine threat in both Atlantic and Pacific theaters. At 306 feet in length with a beam of 37 feet and displacing 1,400 tons, light or 1,740 tons fully loaded, England was smaller and slower than fleet destroyers. She carried a crew of 15 officers and 198 enlisted men. Her armament reflected her specialized role. Three 3-inch 50-caliber dual-purpose guns provided surface and anti-aircraft defense. One 1.1-inch quad automatic weapon, later replaced by 40mm Bofors guns, added close-in anti-aircraft capability. 8 20mm Oerlikon cannons gave additional protection against aircraft. 3 21-inch torpedo tubes provided limited surface attack capability, but England's true weapons were designed for hunting submarines. 2 depth charge racks at the stern could roll 300-pound depth charges off the back of the ship. 8 K-gun depth charge projectors could throw depth charges out to 150 yards on either side, creating a wide pattern around a diving submarine. And mounted forward, the Hedgehog projector with 144 projectiles ready for loading represented the most advanced anti-submarine weapon in the American arsenal. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, England's commanding officer, was 31 years old, a 1935 graduate of the Naval Academy who had spent the previous 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. His executive officer was Lieutenant John Williamson, 28 years old, who would later write the definitive account of England's submarine hunting campaign. Together with their crew, they had trained relentlessly in anti-submarine warfare tactics, conducting dozens of practice attacks, perfecting the coordination between sonar operators, weapons crews, and the ship's helm that made effective submarine hunting possible. The training was about to be tested against an enemy that had every reason to be confident. Japanese submarines in May 1944 were among the most advanced in the world. The Imperial Japanese Navy had built submarines with extraordinary range, high surface speed, and powerful armament. Many could travel 20,000 miles without refueling, far exceeding American or German submarine capabilities. Some carried aircraft for reconnaissance. Others displaced over 5,000 tons, making them the largest submarines in the world at that time. Japanese torpedoes were excellent, particularly the Type 95, which ran at 49 knots with a range of over 9,000 yards and carried a 550-pound warhead. But Japanese submarine doctrine had fundamental flaws that American anti-submarine forces exploited ruthlessly. Japanese submarines were designed and employed primarily to attack warships, particularly aircraft carriers and battleships. This offensive focus meant Japanese submarines spent less time developing defensive capabilities and anti-submarine evasion tactics. Japanese submarine commanders, trained to hunt American capital ships, found themselves hunted by American escort vessels using tactics the Japanese Navy had never seriously studied. Japanese submarines lacked effective radar until mid-1944, and even then, the sets were inferior to American equipment. This meant Japanese submarines operating on the surface at night, their primary method of transit and battery recharging, were visible to American radar long before they could detect their hunters. Most critically, Japanese anti-submarine warfare doctrine was primitive compared to American and British systems. The Imperial Japanese Navy had focused its pre-war planning on fleet actions between battleships and carriers. Convoy protection, submarine hunting, and the unglamorous work of anti-submarine warfare were considered secondary missions unworthy of the best ships and most talented officers. This institutional contempt for defensive warfare meant that when American submarines began systematically destroying Japanese merchant shipping, and when American anti-submarine forces began systematically destroying Japanese submarines, Japan had no effective counter. By contrast, the United States Navy had made anti-submarine warfare a science. Destroyer escorts like England were purpose-built for submarine hunting, with sonar systems more sophisticated than anything Japan possessed, radar that could detect surfaced submarines at 15 miles, and crews trained specifically in anti-submarine tactics. The American hunter-killer concept grouped destroyer escorts with escort carriers, creating mobile anti-submarine task forces that could search vast areas of ocean, locate submarines through signals intelligence and aerial reconnaissance, then prosecute contacts until the submarine was destroyed. The intelligence advantage was overwhelming. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, known as FRUPAC, the successor to Commander Joe Rochfort's famous Station Hypo that had provided the intelligence enabling American victory at Midway, had broken Japanese naval codes and was reading Japanese submarine operational orders in near real time. When Japanese submarine commanders received orders to deploy to specific patrol areas, American intelligence officers read those same orders. When Japanese submarines reported their positions, American codebreakers plotted those positions on maps and vectored hunter-killer groups to intercept. The Japanese Navy knew their codes were compromised but could not develop new code systems quickly enough to prevent American exploitation. On May 13, 1944, FRUPAC intercepted and decoded a transmission from submarine I-16 to Commander Submarine Division 7. The message included I-16's estimated time of arrival off Bougainville as 2200 hours on May 22. This single intercept sealed I-16's fate. The intelligence was immediately passed through 3rd Fleet to Commander Hamilton Haines, commanding Escort Division 39 at Tulagi. Commander Haines ordered 3 destroyer escorts to intercept USS George, USS Raby, and USS England. I-16 was a formidable opponent. Commissioned in 1929 and modernized in the late 1930s, she displaced 2,100 tons, submerged, and could reach 23 knots on the surface. Her crew of 94 included experienced submariners who had conducted operations from the Indian Ocean to the Solomons. I-16 had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, launching one of the midget submarines that attempted to penetrate the harbor. In May 1942, she had launched another midget submarine that torpedoed British battleship HMS Ramillies at Diego Suarez, Madagascar, causing severe damage. I-16 had sunk 4 Allied merchant ships in the Indian Ocean and conducted multiple resupply missions to Japanese forces in the Solomons. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Kaoru Yamada, was a skilled submarine captain with 3 years of combat experience. He knew the waters around Bougainville intimately, having conducted previous missions in the area. His crew was well trained, and his submarine was in good condition. By any measure, I-16 was a dangerous combatant that should have been able to complete her rice delivery mission to Buin and return safely to Truk. But Yamada did not know 3 American destroyer escorts were waiting for him. On May 18th, England, George, and Raby departed Purvis Bay and proceeded to the interception point off Bougainville. They maintained radio silence, using only low-power TBS radio for ship-to-ship communication. They followed a carefully calculated course that would position them along I-16's expected route on the night of May 19th, giving them maximum opportunity to detect the submarine as it approached its destination. May 19th, 1944, was a clear night with calm seas and excellent visibility. Perfect conditions for radar and sonar operations. Perfect conditions for submarine hunting. At approximately 1335 hours, while conducting a line-abreast sonar sweep, England gained sonar contact on I-16 at a range of 4,000 yards. The submarine was submerged, proceeding slowly, apparently, approaching Bougainville for her scheduled rice delivery. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton immediately assumed tactical command of the attack. He ordered George and Raby to maintain sonar contact while England maneuvered into attack position. The three destroyer escorts worked in perfect coordination, using their sonar to triangulate I-16's exact position, course, and speed. This cooperative attack doctrine, developed through extensive training, allowed the American ships to maintain continuous contact even when the submarine attempted evasive maneuvers. I-16's commanding officer, alerted by his sound operator that he was being tracked, dove deeper and increased speed, attempting to evade his pursuers. Japanese submarines could dive to approximately 300 feet operational depth, with an absolute maximum depth of perhaps 400 feet, before hull collapse became likely. Yamada drove I-16 as deep as he dared, maneuvering at varying speeds and courses to confuse the American porties, sonar operators. But American sonar had become remarkably sophisticated by 1944. The QC series sonar installed on destroyer escorts could detect submarines at ranges exceeding 5,000 yards, and could maintain contact through temperature layers and submarine evasive maneuvers that would have broken contact with earlier systems. England's sonar operators, highly trained specialists who could distinguish between submarine contacts, whales, schools of fish, and false echoes, never lost contact with I-16. At 1400 hours, Pendleton ordered the first attack run. England increased speed to 15 knots and headed directly toward the submarine's position. The Hedgehog projector crew prepared their weapon. 24 projectiles were loaded into the mortar cradles. Final firing calculations were made based on the submarine's depth, course, and speed as determined by sonar. At a range of 200 yards, the Hedgehog fired. 24 projectiles arced through the air in an elliptical pattern, splashing into the water ahead of England's bow. The projectiles, armed with contact detonators, sank through the water at approximately 7 feet per second. If the pattern was accurate, some projectiles would strike I-16's hull. If the pattern missed, the projectiles would sink to the bottom without exploding, giving I-16's crew no indication they had been attacked. The attack missed. Sonar operators heard the projectiles hitting the ocean floor 300 feet below. No explosions. I-16 continued evading. Pendleton immediately ordered a second attack run. England circled, regained optimum position, and attacked again. Again, the Hedgehog pattern missed. Again, I-16 continued maneuvering, unaware how close death had come. Lieutenant Commander Yamada must have believed his evasive tactics were working, that he had successfully evaded detection. He could not know that 3 American ships maintained perfect sonar contact, that his every maneuver was being tracked, that his submarine's fate was being calculated by sonar operators and weapons crews who had trained for exactly this situation. Third attack. The Hedgehog fired again. Again, no explosions. I-16 continued evading. Pendleton's crew, professionals who had trained relentlessly, showed no signs of frustration. They methodically prepared for the fourth attack. Fourth attack run. England maneuvered into position. The Hedgehog fired. This time, different sounds echoed through the water. The sharp crack of explosions, 4 detonations, possibly 6. Hedgehog warheads striking I-16's pressure hull and exploding on contact. Then, the terrible sounds of a submarine dying, the grinding screech of metal tearing, the rumble of bulkheads collapsing, the roar of water flooding into compartments. And finally, the massive explosion as I-16's batteries shorted out, or her remaining torpedoes detonated, sending the submarine to the bottom with all 94 men aboard. England's crew cheered, debris surfaced, oil spread across the water. The first kill was confirmed. But Lieutenant Commander Pendleton and Commander Haynes, the escort division commander whose flag was aboard England, knew this was only the beginning. Intelligence suggested more Japanese submarines were operating in the area. The hunt would continue. What none of them knew was that this first kill had triggered attention at the highest levels of Japanese naval command. When I-16 failed to report completion of her mission and failed to return to Truk on schedule, Japanese intelligence officers began investigating. They quickly determined that I-16 had been lost, almost certainly to enemy action. The loss itself was not unprecedented. American anti-submarine forces had been sinking Japanese submarines with increasing frequency throughout 1944, but the location and timing of I-16's loss suggested something more concerning. American forces appeared to be specifically targeting Japanese submarine operations near Bougainville. On May 20, 1944, Frupak intercepted another message that would prove catastrophic for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Japanese Submarine Command was deploying a picket line of submarines north of the Admiralty Islands to intercept American carrier task forces that intelligence suggested would be operating in the area. 7 submarines, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, RO-112, and RO-116, all of the 7th Submarine Squadron, would form a patrol line across a route. Admiral William Halsey had used twice before for Third Fleet operations. The message gave positions, patrol schedules, and operational orders. American codebreakers read every word. Within hours, the intelligence was analyzed and forwarded to operational commanders. Commander Haynes received orders to take his 3 destroyer escorts and intercept the Japanese submarine picket line. Hunt them down, destroy them, do not let them interfere with American carrier operations. The stage was set for the most devastating submarine massacre in naval history. May 22, 1944, 0350 hours, north of the Admiralty Islands. USS George's radar operator detected a surface contact at 15,000 yards, bearing 040. Contact is moving, could be a submarine. The 3 destroyer escorts, England, George, and Raby, had been searching for the Japanese submarine picket line for 2 days. They operated in a coordinated search pattern, maintaining radio silence except for short-range TBS communication, their radar sweeping the dark ocean surface for any sign of surfaced submarines. Japanese submarines, lacking effective radar warning equipment, routinely surfaced at night to recharge batteries and transit at higher speeds. This practice, which had been relatively safe early in the war, had become suicidal by 1944. The contact was RO-106, a Kaiju-type submarine displacing 790 tons surfaced and 960 tons submerged. Commissioned in 1943, RO-106 was relatively new and in excellent condition. Her crew of 38 men was experienced, having conducted multiple patrols. In October 1943, RO-106 had survived serious damage from depth charges, but was repaired and returned to service. During the American assault on Eniwetok Atoll in February 1944, RO-106 had conducted reconnaissance, located several American cruisers and destroyers, and attempted to vector in a bomber strike, a rare example of Japanese submarines coordinating with aircraft. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Sadamu Kamimura, was on the bridge when George's searchlight suddenly illuminated his submarine. The shock must have been absolute. One moment, darkness and apparent safety. The next moment, blinding light and the certain knowledge that enemy warships had detected him. Kamimura immediately ordered a crash dive. RO-106's crew responded with the speed of trained professionals, venting ballast tanks and diving as rapidly as the submarine systems allowed. But crash dives take time. Even well-trained crews need 60 to 90 seconds to submerge completely. George and Raby were already closing at 23 knots. Commander Haynes ordered both ships to attack while England stood off to prevent the submarine from escaping. George reached attack position first and fired her Hedgehog. The 24 projectiles splashed into the water where RO-106 had dived. No explosions. The pattern had missed. RO-106's sound operator would have heard the projectiles hitting the ocean floor. Perhaps he reported to Lieutenant Kamimura that they were being attacked, but the attack had missed. Perhaps Kamimura felt a moment of relief, believing his crash dive had saved his submarine. He immediately ordered evasive maneuvers, increasing speed, changing depth, attempting to break sonar contact with his pursuers. But the American destroyer escorts maintained perfect contact. Their QC-series sonar tracked every maneuver. George prepared for a second attack while Raby maneuvered into position. Again, George fired. Again, the Hedgehog projectiles splashed into the water. Again, no explosions. RO-106 continued evading. After George's second miss, Commander Haynes aboard England assessed the situation. George and Raby were expending attacks without success. The submarine was executing effective, evasive maneuvers that were throwing off their attack calculations. Time to employ the ship that had already proven successful. Haynes ordered England to take over the attack. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought England into position. His crew had performed this drill dozens of times in training and once in actual combat 3 days earlier. The sonar operators provided precise depth, course, and speed data. The Hedgehog crew loaded their projectiles and prepared to fire. At 0 to 4:25, England gained perfect sonar contact. Pendleton ordered the first attack. The Hedgehog fired. 24 projectiles arced ahead of England's bow. Again, no explosions. The pattern had missed, but Pendleton was not discouraged. He maintained sonar contact and prepared for immediate re-attack. 5 minutes later, England fired a second Hedgehog salvo. This time, the ocean exploded. 3 detonations, possibly more. The distinctive sound of warheads striking metal and exploding on contact. Then the terrible sounds of a submarine's death. Metal tearing, bulkheads collapsing, water flooding into compartments under tremendous pressure. And finally, at 0 to 5:06, a massive underwater explosion as RO-106's hull collapsed under the crushing weight of the ocean. England's crew cheered again. Oil and debris surfaced. The second kill was confirmed. 2 Japanese submarines destroyed in 3 days, but there were 5 more submarines in the picket line. The hunt continued. The 3 destroyer escorts reformed their search pattern and continued north, following the intelligence that indicated where the remaining Japanese submarines should be positioned. They maintained perfect radio discipline. They operated their radar continuously, searching for surfaced submarines. They proceeded as a coordinated team, each ship covering assigned sectors, each crew prepared to attack on immediate notice. May 23, 1944, 06:17 hours. Contact. Another Japanese submarine detected. This was RO-104, another Kaiju-type submarine identical to RO-106. RO-104 was submerged, proceeding slowly on her assigned patrol station, her crew unaware that 2 of their sister submarines had already been destroyed and that American hunter-killer forces were systematically eliminating the entire picket line. The attack began immediately. USS Raby gained sonar contact and maneuvered into position. At 0 to 6:35, Raby fired her Hedgehog. No explosions. The pattern missed. Raby circled and attacked again. Again, no explosions. USS George then attempted 2 attacks. Both missed. For 2 hours, from 0 to 6:17 until 0 to 8:34, Raby and George made repeated attacks against RO-104. 8 Hedgehog salvos were fired. All 8 missed. RO-104's commanding officer was executing superb evasive maneuvers, changing depth and course unpredictably, exploiting every advantage his submarine possessed. Then Commander Haynes made the call. England would take over. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought his ship into attack position. His sonar operators tracked RO-104's maneuvers. His Hedgehog crew prepared their weapons. At 0 to 8:34, England fired. Multiple explosions. At least 4 detonations. The sound of Hedgehog warheads striking RO-104's pressure hull. Then the sounds of structural failure. Metal screaming, water flooding. And at 0 to 8:38, the final explosion as RO-104 went to the bottom with all 38 crew members, 3 submarines in 4 days. England's reputation was spreading through the American fleet. Rear Admiral Hamilton Haynes, commanding from England's bridge, sent a message to George after the attack. The message would become famous among destroyer escort crews. After George had missed 8 consecutive attacks and England had succeeded on the second attempt, George's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Fred Just, radioed England asking how they did it. Commander Haynes responded with a message that was both witty and reflective of the racial attitudes of 1944. Personnel and equipment worked with the smoothness of well-oiled clockwork. As a result of our efforts, Recording Angel working overtime checking in Japanese submariners joining honorable ancestors. The 3 destroyer escorts continued hunting, May 24, 1944, 01:20 hours. Radar contact. USS George detected another surfaced submarine. The contact was RO-116, caught on the surface recharging batteries. The submarine dived immediately upon detection, but England had gained sonar contact. At 0 to 1:50, England was in attack position. Pendleton ordered the Hedgehog fired. At 0 to 2:14, the first salvo detonated. 3 to 5 explosions, followed by breaking up noises. This time, the submarine's death was quieter than previous kills. The major explosions that had marked earlier sinkings did not occur, but sonar operators heard the sounds of a submarine breaking apart, and at 0 to 7:02, after sunrise, oil and debris appeared on the surface. The oil slick expanded over the following day to cover several square miles, confirming the kill. 4 Japanese submarines destroyed in 6 days. The systematic massacre of the 7th Submarine Squadron's picket line was nearing completion, but England's crew had no time to celebrate. Intelligence indicated at least 3 more submarines were operating in the patrol line. The hunt had to continue. By this point, Japanese Submarine Command knew something catastrophic was occurring. 4 submarines had failed to report. 4 submarines had not responded to radio calls. The patrol line that was supposed to intercept American carriers had gone silent. Japanese intelligence officers analyzed the situation and reached the correct conclusion. American anti-submarine forces were systematically destroying the picket line, but they could not determine how the Americans had located the submarines so precisely, or why their attacks were so devastatingly effective. What Japanese commanders did not know was that every radio transmission they sent was being intercepted and decoded by FRUPAC. Every order to investigate the missing submarines, every repositioning command for the remaining submarines, every assessment of the situation. American intelligence read it all, analyzed it all, and provided updated intelligence to Commander Haynes and his hunter-killer group. The Americans knew where the remaining submarines were before the submarines themselves received their orders. On May 26, 1944, a hunter-killer group consisting of escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay and 4 Fletcher-class destroyers, Hazelwood, Heerman, Howell, and McCord, arrived on station to reinforce the 3 destroyer escorts. The destroyer escorts were running low on fuel and Hedgehog projectiles after 6 days of continuous hunting. They needed to break off and return to base for replenishment, but before they left, there was 1 more submarine to find. Intelligence indicated RO-108 was operating in the area. At 0 to 1:45 hours on May 26, England gained sonar contact. RO-108 was submerged, moving slowly, apparently unaware that 4 of her sister submarines had already been destroyed. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton manoeuvred England into position. This attack would be different. After 4 successful kills, England's crew had refined their tactics to near perfection. The sonar operators could predict submarine maneuvers. The Hedgehog crew could calculate firing solutions with extraordinary precision. The coordination between sonar, helm, and weapons was seamless. At 0 to 2:33, England fired her Hedgehog, multiple explosions, at least 5 detonations, possibly more. The sounds of catastrophic hull failure followed immediately. RO-108 had been struck with devastating accuracy. The submarine's pressure hull ruptured in multiple locations. Water flooded into compartments. The submarine plummeted toward the ocean floor. At 0 to 2:38, a massive explosion marked RO-108's final moment as her battery compartments flooded and shorted out, or as her remaining torpedoes detonated, or as her hull collapsed under pressure. All 38 crew members died instantly. 5 Japanese submarines destroyed in 8 days. The achievement was unprecedented. No ship in any navy had ever sunk 5 submarines in such a short period. Admiral Ernest King, chief of naval operations, would later call it the greatest anti-submarine achievement in history. But England's hunt was not finished. The 3 destroyer escorts departed for Manus to refuel and rearm. They arrived on May 27th and spent 3 days taking on fuel oil, provisions, and Hedgehog projectiles. During this brief respite, England's crew learned that their exploits had become known throughout the Pacific Fleet. Messages of congratulation arrived from Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet. Admiral William Halsey sent his personal commendations. Destroyer escort crews throughout the Pacific were studying England's tactics, hoping to replicate her success. But the most important message came from Japanese submarine command. Intercepted and decoded by Frupak, the message revealed that Japanese commanders had finally realized the full extent of the disaster. 5 submarines lost, the entire picket line destroyed. The mission to intercept American carriers had failed catastrophically. And the message revealed one more critical piece of intelligence. There were 2 more submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron operating in the area, RO-105 and RO-109. Both were ordered to withdraw immediately to Truk. Commander Haynes received this intelligence on May 30th, while England, George and Raby were still at Manus. He immediately ordered his ships to prepare for departure. If they could intercept the withdrawing submarines before they reached safety, they could complete the destruction of the entire squadron. At 1400 hours on May 30th, the 3 destroyer escorts departed Manus and proceeded at maximum speed toward the area where the Japanese submarines were expected to be withdrawing. May 31st, 1944. 01:30 hours. USS George gained sonar contact on a submerged submarine. The contact was RO-105, attempting to withdraw to Truk as ordered. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Toshitake Aramaki, had heard nothing from the other submarines in his squadron. He knew something had gone terribly wrong but did not know what. He proceeded cautiously, submerged during daylight, only surfacing briefly at night to recharge batteries and receive radio transmissions. But caution was not enough. American sonar had detected him. The 3 destroyer escorts maneuvered into attack positions. Then, something unusual occurred. RO-105's commanding officer, perhaps sensing the danger or perhaps detecting sonar pings, executed a brilliant evasive maneuver. He positioned his submarine directly between USS Raby and USS George, so that neither destroyer escort could attack without risking hitting the other American ship with Hedgehog projectiles. For 5 minutes, RO-105 maintained this position. Neither Raby nor George could fire safely. Then RO-105 submerged and moved away from the killing zone. It was a masterful piece of submarine, handling that should have saved the submarine. Raby and George immediately regained contact and began attacking. Raby fired. No explosions. George fired. No explosions. Raby fired again. No explosions. George fired again. No explosions. For 30 minutes, the 2 destroyer escorts made repeated attacks without success. RO-105's commanding officer was executing perfect evasive maneuvers, changing depth and course unpredictably, exploiting his submarine's capabilities to maximum advantage. Then Commander Haynes sent the message that would become legendary among destroyer escort crews. His radio transmission to England was brief and profane. "Oh hell! Go ahead, England." Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought England into position. By now, his crew could perform the entire attack sequence almost instinctively. Sonar operators tracked the target. Weapons crews prepared the Hedgehog. Helmsmen positioned the ship. At 0 to 7:36, England fired. 6 to 10 explosions, multiple. Hedgehog warheads striking RO-105's hull and detonating on contact. Then, at 0 to 7:41, 5 minutes after the initial hits, a major underwater explosion as RO-105's hull finally gave way. Oil and debris surfaced shortly afterward. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. 6 Japanese submarines destroyed in 12 days. USS England had achieved what no other warship in history had achieved before or has achieved since. The feat was so extraordinary that many historians initially doubted the records. Surely, they argued, no single ship could have sunk 6 submarines in less than 2 weeks. But the evidence was irrefutable. Japanese naval records, recovered after the war, confirmed that all 6 submarines were lost with all hands. American action reports, sonar recordings, and physical evidence from debris fields confirmed the dates and circumstances of each sinking. England's achievement was real and remains unmatched. The psychological impact on Japanese submarine forces was devastating. When the 7th Submarine Squadron failed to return to Truk, when messages went unanswered, when the patrol line simply vanished, Japanese submarine commanders understood that something fundamental had changed in the nature of submarine warfare. American anti-submarine capabilities had evolved to a point where Japanese submarines could no longer operate effectively. Lieutenant Commander Hitoshi Kashiwagi, operations officer for the 6th Fleet Submarine Force, wrote in a classified report dated June 7, 1944, later captured by American forces in the Philippines. The loss of 7 submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron represents the worst submarine disaster in Imperial Japanese Navy history. Analysis suggests American forces possessed detailed intelligence about our patrol line deployment, including positions and schedules. American anti-submarine attacks demonstrated coordination and precision, far exceeding any previous encounters. New weapons, possibly ahead-throwing mortars, are achieving kill rates approaching 100% once contact is established. American sonar capabilities allow them to maintain contact through all evasive maneuvers. American radar prevents safe surface operations even at night. Combined with their code-breaking advantage, these capabilities make continued submarine operations in the Central Pacific extremely hazardous. Lieutenant Commander Kashiwagi's assessment was entirely accurate, though it came too late to save the submarines already lost. The mathematics of submarine survival had turned decisively against Japan. By June 1944, Japanese submarines were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. American anti-submarine forces, using intelligence from code-breaking, detection from advanced radar and sonar, and weapons like the Hedgehog, had created a system against which Japanese submarines had no effective counter. The comparison with German U-boat operations in the Atlantic is instructive. At the peak of the Battle of the Atlantic in 1943, German U-boats faced increasingly effective Allied anti-submarine warfare, including escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, advanced radar, improved depth charges, and the Hedgehog weapon. Allied anti-submarine forces developed hunter-killer groups similar to those employed in the Pacific. The Germans responded by developing new technologies, including snorkel systems that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, better radar warning receivers, acoustic torpedoes that homed on ship propeller noise, and eventually the Type XXI submarine with high underwater speed. Japan attempted some similar innovations but lacked the industrial capacity and technical sophistication to implement them effectively. Japanese submarines received primitive radar warning receivers in late 1944, but they were far inferior to German equipment. Japan never developed an effective snorkel system. Japanese acoustic torpedoes were tested but never deployed operationally. Most critically, Japan never developed the kind of close cooperation between submarines and anti-submarine forces that would have allowed tactical lessons to be shared and countermeasures developed. The result was a one-sided slaughter that continued through 1944 and into 1945. American destroyers, destroyer escorts, submarines, and aircraft sank Japanese submarines with increasing frequency. By the end of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy had effectively lost the ability to conduct submarine operations in the Pacific. Submarines that ventured into areas patrolled by American forces rarely returned. Submarine commanders requested transfers to surface ships or shore duty. Morale among submarine crews collapsed as they understood they were being sent on missions from which few returned. The human cost was staggering. In the 6 submarines England destroyed, 236 Japanese sailors died. All 6 submarines went down with all hands. There were no survivors. The speed and violence of Hedgehog attacks meant that most submariners died within minutes, either from the initial explosions or from drowning as their compartments flooded. Those who survived the initial attack faced death by drowning in darkness as their submarines plummeted to depths where the pressure hull collapsed, killing everyone instantly. Petty Officer Fumio Hashizume, a sonar operator who survived the war after his submarine returned to Japan before the deployment of the 7th Submarine Squadron's picket line, later described what submariners feared most. "We knew about depth charges. They exploded around you and sometimes close enough to damage the submarine, but usually you could survive if your commanding officer was skilled and your submarine was strong. But the Americans had developed a new weapon that we called the silent killer. You would hear projectiles hitting the water, but they would not explode unless they struck the submarine. If they missed, you never knew you had been attacked, but if they hit, the explosions came without warning, multiple detonations striking the hull. The pressure hull would rupture, water would flood in. There was no time to react, no time to reach emergency stations. You simply drowned in darkness while the submarine sank." England's crew understood the terrible nature of what they were doing. They were professional sailors performing their duty in wartime, but they were also human beings who recognized that each successful attack meant the death of 30 to 90 men. Lieutenant John Williamson, England's executive officer, wrote in his personal journal, a passage later published in his 1980 memoir, "We cheered after each successful attack because we knew we had accomplished our fear mission and protected American forces from submarine attack. But the cheers were brief and subdued. Every man aboard England understood that we had just killed dozens of men who, like us, were sailors doing their duty. There was no joy in it, only grim satisfaction that we had done our job well. The Japanese submariners were brave men serving their country. They deserved to be remembered with respect, even though they were our enemies." After sinking RO 105 on May 31st, England, George and Raby returned to Manus for extended maintenance. England had expended most of her Hedgehog projectiles and needed replenishment. The 3 destroyer escorts had been at sea almost continuously for 2 weeks, conducting intensive anti-submarine operations that had strained crews and equipment. They needed rest and repair before returning to operational status. During June 1944, England continued escort duties in the Solomon Islands and provided anti-submarine screening for amphibious operations. She encountered no more submarines, as Japanese Submarine Command had withdrawn all submarines from the Central Solomons after the disaster of late May. The area that had once been heavily patrolled by Japanese submarines was now effectively a Japanese submarine-free zone, controlled absolutely by American anti-submarine forces. In July 1944, England participated in operations supporting the invasion of Guam. She provided anti-submarine screening for transport ships and conducted routine patrol duties. Again, she encountered no submarines. Japanese Submarine Command had learned the lesson. Areas where American hunter-killer groups operated were death traps for submarines. From August through December 1944, England continued operating in the Western Pacific, providing escort services and anti-submarine screening. She participated in operations at Palau, Ulithi, and the Philippines. Her reputation preceded her. When England arrived at an anchorage, other ships would signal congratulations and ask about her submarine hunting techniques. Destroyer escort crews studied England's action reports, hoping to learn the secrets of her success. But England's war was not finished. On January 2, 1945, England began escort duties between Manus and Ulithi, the major base for American carrier task forces. These convoys transported supplies, ammunition, replacement aircraft, and personnel to support the massive carrier raids on Japanese-held territories. The convoys required protection against the diminishing but still dangerous Japanese submarine threat. England provided that protection, though she encountered no submarines during these operations. In March 1945, England was assigned to Task Force 54 for the invasion of Okinawa. She provided anti-submarine and anti-aircraft screening during the pre-invasion bombardment, then took up patrol stations north of the island. The invasion of Okinawa, beginning on April 1, 1945, triggered the most intense Japanese aerial resistance of the entire war. Kamikaze attacks, where Japanese pilots deliberately crashed explosive-laden aircraft into American ships, inflicted terrible casualties on the invasion force. England, operating as a radar picket destroyer escort, was positioned to provide early warning of incoming Japanese aircraft and to intercept them before they could reach the main fleet. Radar picket duty was among the most dangerous assignments in the Pacific War. Radar picket ships were isolated, positioned far from the main fleet, and were primary targets for kamikaze attacks. Between April and June 1945, American forces at Okinawa lost 36 ships sunk and 368 damaged, the vast majority from kamikaze attacks. May 9, 1945. USS England was on radar picket station north of the Kurama-Reto when 3 Japanese dive bombers attacked. England's anti-aircraft gunners engaged immediately. The 5-inch and 40mm guns fired continuously. One bomber was hit and began smoking, but the pilot maintained control and aimed his aircraft directly at England's bridge. The kamikaze struck near the bridge, penetrating the superstructure and exploding inside. The blast killed 37 crew members and wounded 25 more. Fire swept through the forward superstructure. The bridge was destroyed, communications were knocked out, but England's damage control parties responded with the professionalism that had characterized her entire service. They fought the fires, sealed damaged compartments, and kept the ship afloat. England managed to steam under her own power back to the Philippines for emergency repairs, then crossed the Pacific to the Philadelphia Navy Yard for complete reconstruction. But the war ended before repairs were completed. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. England received orders to decommission. On October 31, 1945, after just 675 days in commissioned service, USS England was decommissioned at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. She had earned 10 battle stars for World War II service and a Presidential Unit Citation for her extraordinary anti-submarine warfare achievements. The Presidential Unit Citation, signed by President Harry Truman, read in part, "For outstanding performance in combat against enemy forces from May 19 to 31, 1944, utilizing to the full all available weapons and equipment, USS England skillfully coordinated her attacks with other vessels and with cooperating aircraft, striking boldly and with exceptional precision at the enemy. In a sustained series of attacks, she destroyed 6 hostile submarines within 12 days, effecting this devastating blow to enemy operations during a particularly crucial period and disrupting attempts by the enemy to evacuate key units. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, made his famous promise upon learning of England's achievements. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. That promise was fulfilled on October 6, 1960, when the Navy commissioned a guided missile destroyer leader, USS England, DLG-22, named in honor of both Ensign John England and the destroyer escort that bore his name. That second USS England served with distinction until 1994, participating in Vietnam War operations and Cold War deterrence patrols. She was decommissioned in 1994 and scrapped in 2004. No third USS England has been commissioned, though proposals have been made periodically. The name remains one of the most honored in American naval history, representing the pinnacle of anti-submarine warfare achievement. The original USS England, DE 635, was sold for scrap in November 1946. She was broken up at a Philadelphia scrapyard, her steel recycled for peacetime uses. But her legacy endures. Every destroyer escort sailor who served in the Pacific knew about England. Every anti-submarine warfare officer who trained in the decades after World War II studied England's tactics. Every modern anti-submarine warfare platform, from Cold War destroyers to contemporary Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, incorporates lessons learned from England's campaigns. The Hedgehog weapon that England employed so effectively remained in service with the United States Navy until the 1960s, when it was finally replaced by more advanced anti-submarine weapons. But the principles England demonstrated, coordinated sonar tracking, precise attack calculation, immediate re-attack capability, and crew training to the highest standards, remain fundamental to anti-submarine warfare doctrine today. For the Japanese submarine force, England's rampage in May 1944 represented not just a tactical defeat but a strategic collapse. The loss of 6 submarines in 12 days, combined with the systematic destruction of Japanese submarines throughout 1944, effectively ended Japan's ability to conduct submarine warfare. By early 1945, Japanese submarines rarely ventured into areas where American anti-submarine forces operated. Those that did rarely returned. The human cost of Japan's submarine losses was severe. Approximately 10,000 Japanese submariners died during World War II, the vast majority in 1944 and 1945. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 129 submarines during the war, representing approximately 75% of all Japanese submarines commissioned. This casualty rate exceeded even the terrible losses suffered by German U-boats in the Atlantic, where approximately 70% of U-boat crews died. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.